Almost midnight, and the rain hammered hard against the kitchen windows. Jake Harper had just settled into bed when the pounding started at the front door. Not knocking, pounding. Out here, a black man living alone with his daughter never wanted to hear that sound after dark. When he opened the door, Emily Walker, the blonde neighbor he had barely ever spoken to, stood there soaked through and shaking. She looked straight into his eyes and said the words that froze his blood.
I need a husband by Friday, and it has to be you.
Jake stood in the doorway with the rain spitting against the porch boards behind her, and for a long second he could not make his mouth move. The words had landed somewhere between his chest and his throat and stayed there. A husband, by Friday. Him. He had known Emily Walker the way a man knows a fence line he passes every week. Her father's pasture started where his own ended, just on the other side of the county road that ran between their houses, and that was about as close as the two of them had ever stood. She was the polite young woman who waved from a pickup, who sometimes brought a casserole over after Sarah passed, then drove back across the road before he could think of what to say. Tonight, she did not look polite. She looked drenched and cornered with both hands wrapped around a brown folder, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Get inside before you catch your death," Jake said. She stepped in. Rainwater ran off her jacket onto the front mat. He could hear the old farmhouse creaking in the wind, and somewhere upstairs the soft tick of the hallway clock that had hung there since his mother's time. "You're tracking water everywhere," he said, just to have something normal to say. "Hold on." He grabbed a clean towel from the laundry basket and held it out. Emily took it with shaking hands. She pressed it to her hair, then to her face, and when she lowered it again, her eyes were red but steady. "I'm sorry, Jake. I know how this sounds. I walked from the road. Grant took my keys this afternoon, and I couldn't think of anywhere else to go that wouldn't make things worse." The name landed in him the way bad weather lands on a roof. Grant Walker had been gone from this county for years. If he was back, and if he had taken his sister's keys, then something had broken loose at the Walker place, and Jake already had a guess what it was. "Come into the kitchen," he said. "I'll put coffee on, then you talk." She followed him without a word. He filled the pot and set 2 mugs on the table. Emily set the folder between them like she was setting down something live. "My dad's will," she said. "The full version, not the part he read to me back in the spring." "There's a part he didn't read," Jake said. "There's a condition," she answered. She opened the folder. The pages had gone soft at the corners from the rain. Jake did not pretend to understand legal language. He watched her finger move down the page until it stopped on a paragraph she had marked with a yellow tab. "If I'm not married by the end of this week, I lose primary control of the farm," Emily said. "Grant gets it. Friday is the deadline. The lawyer told me this morning." "This morning," Jake repeated. "This morning." He let that sit a second. David Walker had been a careful man, the kind who patched a fence on his way to a funeral if he passed a loose post, the kind who had crossed his own pasture in 1990-something with a tin of his wife's biscuits when Jake's father was first put on hospice, and who, 20 years later, had sat on this very porch with Jake the week Sarah died and said almost nothing. A man like that did not put a clause into a will by accident. "He thought Grant would push you out," Jake said. "He thought Grant would sell." Her voice cracked on the last word. "And he was right. Grant came back this morning. Brand new truck, brand new boots, talking like the cattle were already gone. He has a development company lined up. They want to walk the property this week." "House lots." "House lots." Jake set his mug down without drinking. He had seen that math run before. A pasture became an acreage. An acreage became a subdivision. Around here, once that started, it did not stop at one farm. "There's more," Emily said. "Figured there might be." She slid a single folded sheet out from inside the folder. It was on plain notepaper, not legal stock. The handwriting on the outside was a careful slanted print that Jake recognized before she even turned it over. "He left this with the lawyer," she said. "For me. The lawyer gave it to me this afternoon after Grant left." Jake did not reach for it. He waited. She read it out quiet like she had read it to herself a dozen times already. If anything happens, go see Jake Harper. He understands the value of land, and he understands the value of people. He won't push you. He won't lie to you. Trust him to tell you the truth even when you don't want to hear it. The kitchen seemed to get very still. The coffee pot clicked behind him. Jake looked down at the table because if he looked at Amelie right, then he was not sure what his face would do. David. He had not heard the man's voice in months, and there it was, plain as if he had walked in and sat down. "He shouldn't have put that on you," Jake said finally. "Or on me. He didn't put anything on you yet." Amelie folded her hands flat on the table. "I am." So there it was. She did not soften it. She did not dress it up. She had walked through a storm in the dark to say it, and now she said it. "I need a husband by Friday, Jake, on paper. I'm not asking for a life. I'm asking for a name on a license so Grant can't sell my father's land out from under me. I'll move into your spare room. I'll pull my weight. When the estate clears and the farm is safe, we figure out what comes next together. But I had to come tonight because I don't have until next week. I have 4 days." Jake closed his eyes. He thought of the small ranch he had spent 3 years holding together with both hands. He thought of the second mortgage he had taken out the winter Sarah got sick. He thought of the way certain people in this town still looked at him in the feed aisle, the way some of them looked at Maya at the school pickup, polite on top, careful underneath. He thought of what marrying a white woman from the Walker place in 4 days would do to all of that. He thought of David sitting on his porch in silence. And then he thought of his daughter. A small sound came from the stairs. He opened his eyes. Maya was standing on the 3rd step from the bottom in her green pajamas, one hand on the railing, her hair sticking up on one side from the pillow. She was watching Amelie the way she watched anything new, which was carefully from a distance with both eyes wide. "Daddy," she said. "Who's the lady?" Amelie turned in her chair. She did not stand up. She did not reach. She just folded her hands a little tighter and waited, and Jake felt something shift in his chest, because she had read his daughter in 2 seconds and known not to crowd her. "This is Miss Amelie," Jake said. "From the farm across the road. You remember her daddy, Mr. David, who brought you that little wooden horse last Christmas?" Maya nodded slowly. "He was nice." He was. "Is Miss Amelie okay?" The question landed harder than Amelie was ready for. Jake saw her swallow. "Miss Amelie had a rough night," he said. "She's going to sit at our table for a little while. Then you and I are going back to bed." "All right." Maya considered them both with the gravity only a 6-year-old in pajamas can manage at midnight. Then she came down 2 more stairs, walked over to Amelie, and held out the small stuffed rabbit she had been clutching against her side. "You can borrow him," Maya said. "He helps." Amelie took the rabbit with both hands. "Thank you, sweetheart." "You're welcome." Jake walked Maya back upstairs, tucked her in, kissed her forehead, told her 2 true things and 1 quiet promise the way he always did at night, and stood in her doorway 1 extra second before he pulled it half closed. When he came down again, Amelie was holding the rabbit on her lap and crying without sound. He sat across from her again. "If I do this," he said, "we live by a rule. Between you and me, no lies. Not in this house, not at this table. Out there, we do whatever has to be done to keep your father's land out of Grant's hands. But in here, we stay clean. You don't pretend this is love. I don't pretend I'm a hero." "Okay." And the second you walk in that door, you understand something. Maya is the first thing, always. Before the farm, before me, before any deadline on any piece of paper. If at any point what we're doing starts to hurt her, we stop. We figure out another way. Are we clear on that? Yes? Say it back to me, Amelie. Maya comes first. Always. Jake let out a breath he had been holding for a long time. He reached across and rested 2 fingers briefly on the back of her hand. Not a promise. Just a sign that they were on the same side of the table now. "Then we go to the courthouse in the morning," he said. Before Amelie went down the hall to the guest room, she stopped at the foot of the stairs, took the rabbit out from under her arm, and set it gently on the corner of the 3rd step where Maya would see it first thing in the morning. Then she went to bed. The next morning was cold and clear, the way mornings sometimes are after a storm spends itself in the night. Jake put on the cleanest shirt he owned, the dark blue one Sarah had bought him a long time ago, for a wedding he could no longer remember the bride of. Emily came down the hall in a pale yellow dress she had pulled from a duffel bag and steamed straight with a kettle in his kitchen. She looked tired and a little bit brave. Maya wore her good shoes, because Jake had told her in the simplest words he could find that today Daddy and Miss Emily had some grown-up paperwork to sign at the courthouse, and that afterward they were all going to get pancakes. The rabbit was tucked under her arm. She had found him on the stair, looked at Emily across the kitchen for a long second, and then carried him down without saying anything about it. Maya had asked one question the way Maya always did. "Is Miss Emily going to live in our house?" For a while, Jake had said, "In the spare room." Maya had thought about that, then nodded once, and gone to find her shoes. They drove into town in his pickup with the heater on too high. None of them said much. Emily looked out the passenger window at the wet fields rolling past. Maya sat between them in her booster, humming a small song to herself, the stuffed rabbit on her lap. At the courthouse, the clerk slid the forms across. Jake wrote his full name, Jacob Lee Harper, in the block. Emily wrote hers next to his Emily Ann Walker, and her hand only shook a little. A judge with tired eyes and a kind voice said the words in a side room with beige walls and a single dusty plant. Jake held Emily's hand because the script told him to. Her fingers were cold. His were calloused. Maya stood between them, holding the rabbit by one ear, watching like she was memorizing it for later. When the judge said the last line, Emily looked at the ring of plain silver Jake had slid onto her finger, then up at him. "Now what?" she whispered. "Now we go keep your father's farm standing," Jake said. She nodded. But her eyes did not move off his face, and in that small extra second, Jake understood something he was not ready to name yet. This thing they had just signed was not going to stay as small as the piece of paper it was written on. It was already bigger than that. It was sitting between them in the room breathing. He picked Maya up on the way out and carried her down the courthouse steps into the bright, wet morning with Emily walking beside him in her pale yellow dress. And the truth was, for the first time in 3 years, the air in his lungs did not feel quite so thin. Emily moved into the spare room at the end of the hall that afternoon. She had 2 duffel bags, a coat, and a cardboard box of papers she did not trust her brother to leave alone at her father's house. Jake carried the box. She carried the bags. The spare room had a window that faced the east pasture, and a quilt his mother had pieced together one winter when his father was laid up with a bad back. Jake set the box on the foot of the bed and stood there a beat too long because he had not had another adult sleep under this roof since the night Sarah came home from the hospital for the last time, and the room felt smaller than it had that morning. "Bathroom's across the hall," he said. "Closet door squeaks. I'll oil it later." "You don't have to keep apologizing for the house, Jake. It's a good house." "I wasn't apologizing. I was warning you." She almost laughed. It was the first time he had heard anything close to a laugh come out of her, and it surprised them both. That first night, Jake heard her step into the hall once and stop near the kitchen and then go back to her room. He did not sleep much himself. He lay on his back and listened to the wind work against the eaves, and he tried not to think about the woman with cold fingers 2 doors down. In the morning, Maya came down the stairs in her school clothes and stopped at the bottom because Emily was already at the kitchen table with a mug between her hands. Maya considered her over the railing for a long stretch of seconds, then walked the rest of the way down with the careful courtesy of a small person doing a brave thing. "Are you my new mommy?" Maya asked. Jake at the stove, with a spatula in his hand, felt his ribs lock up. Emily set the mug down. She did not stand. She did not lean across the table. She bent forward in her chair until she was eye level with Maya and put her hands flat on her knees. "No, sweetheart, I'm not. Your mommy was your mommy. Nobody is going to take her place. I'm Miss Emily. I'm your daddy's friend. And I'd like to be your friend too if that's all right with you." Maya thought about that, with the same gravity she had used at midnight. "Okay. The rabbit can live in the spare room sometimes. He doesn't mind. That's very generous. Daddy says generous is when you share something you actually want to keep. Your daddy is right. Maya nodded and climbed onto her chair for breakfast. Jake turned back to the stove because his throat had done something he was not ready to look at. By mid-morning, the whole county knew. That was how small towns worked. By the time Jake parked outside the feed store, 3 different pickups had slowed coming the other way to see who was in his passenger seat. Marlene watched Amelie walk in with the practiced calm of a woman who had seen everything twice. "Well," Marlene said, "that happened quick." Amelie's cheeks went hot. Jake set a bag of mineral blocks on the counter. "Need 2 more of those." Marlene rang up the order. "Congratulations, I suppose?" "Thank you," Amelie said very softly. Out in the parking lot, 2 men by the propane tank stopped talking when Amelie walked past. One of them tipped his cap to Jake, the way some men did when they were not quite sure whether to. The other did not move at all. "Everybody thinks I'm ridiculous," Amelie said when they were back in the truck. "Everybody's curious. Different thing. It feels the same. It isn't." She turned her face to the window for the first half-mile. He did not push. He knew the shape of those looks better than she did, and there was no point pretending some of them had been about her dress. Grant came by the Walker farm the next morning the way Jake had known he would. His new truck was parked by the main barn. Grant himself was standing in the yard in a dark coat talking to 2 of the hired men with his hands in his pockets, like he already owned what he was looking at. He turned and smiled when he saw them. "Well, here they are, the happy couple." Amelie's grip on her clipboard went white at the knuckles. Grant took 2 steps to cut them off and looked Jake up and down with the easy half-smile of a man who had practiced cruelty in a mirror. "Nice move, Harper. Marry the younger sister. Suddenly you're standing on Walker land like you belong here." The 2 workers looked down at the ground. That was the part that bothered Jake. They were good men, but they were waiting to see who carried weight now. Jake's hand curled at his side and then opened again. He had learned a long time ago that anger did not fix a gate, or pay a bill, or win an argument in front of witnesses. "I'm standing beside my wife," he said. "That's all." Amelie glanced at him. The word landed between them differently than it had at the courthouse. Heavier, less paper. Grant rolled his eyes and turned toward the workers. "Nobody makes any major changes around here until this mess is sorted out. We clear." "That isn't your call," Amelie said. "Isn't it?" "No, Grant, it isn't." Grant looked amused, but Jake saw the older of the 2 workers, Ray, look at Amelie for the first time, as if he was actually listening. Not convinced yet. Just listening. After Grant left, Amelie walked into the barn and gripped the edge of a stall door so hard the wood whined. "You could have answered him for me," she said. "I could have. Why didn't you?" "Because then everybody on this place learns to look at me when there's a hard question instead of you. You don't want that. Neither do I." She did not like that answer at first. He watched her work through it in silence with her jaw set. Then she let the breath out and nodded. That afternoon, Mr. Callahan called. Grant had filed a formal challenge to the marriage with the estate, and a compliance review had been scheduled. Amelie would have a few weeks to demonstrate that she was running the farm in good faith. If she could not, Grant would inherit primary control. "Build your case," Callahan said. "Bring me your numbers." Amelie set the phone down and looked at Jake. "All right," she said. "All right." 2 days later, on a stretch of fence along the west pasture, Ray asked Jake about a corner brace instead of asking Amelie. Jake bent down and made a careful show of picking mud off his boot until Amelie realized he was not going to answer. Her face went bright with embarrassment and then settled. "Replace the brace, Ray," she said. "Not a patch. We'll be back out here next week if we patch it." Ray shifted his weight. "It'll cost more." "I know. Do it right." Ray nodded once slow. "Yes, ma'am." When he walked off, Amelie turned on Jake. "You stared at your boot." "I did. That was awful." "Yep. But he listened." "He did." She made dinner that night without asking where anything was. At the end of supper, Maya reached over and patted Amelie's hand twice the way she patted the rabbit when the rabbit had been good. Amelie did not say anything about it, but Jake saw her throat work, and he understood that whatever wall she had carried into this house was getting thinner by the day, and that his own wall was not in any better shape. Grant waited almost a week before he made his next move. It was a Friday afternoon when Ray called Amelie's phone from the south pasture. Amelie took the call standing in Jake's barn, and Jake watched the color drain out of her face. "He's at the farm with 2 men I don't know. Ray says they're walking the property line." Jake shut the valve he had been working on. "Buyers. Sounds like it." By the time they pulled into the Walker yard, Grant was standing near the cattle pens with 2 men in clean jackets, one of them in shoes so polished it looked like he had stepped out of a different state. Grant turned and smiled the way he had smiled before, only thinner. "Amelie? Good. Saves me a phone call." "What are you doing, Grant?" "Showing interested parties the property. This farm is not for sale." One of the buyers shifted. Grant took 2 slow steps toward Amelie. "It will be. Once the estate stops entertaining this courthouse circus." "It isn't a circus. It's a marriage." Grant let out a short laugh that did not reach his eyes. "Listen to her. Married a week and already talking like she owns the place." He turned his head an inch toward Jake. "And you. You think I don't know how thin your ranch is running? Harper won bad winter from foreclosure, that's what people say. She's not a wife. She's a life raft." Jake felt Amelie flinch beside him. Even she did not look up. He kept his voice level. "Say what you want about me, Grant, but you don't get to bring strangers through these pastures without your sister say so. That's the law of the place. Your daddy lived by it. So do I. Don't lecture me about my own father. Then stop using him to take from his daughter." The yard went still. "Grant, maybe we should reschedule," one of the buyers said. "Until ownership is settled." Grant's jaw tightened. He looked at Amelie one more time. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," Amelie answered, "but I'll regret selling it more." The buyers followed Grant out less sure than they had come in. Ray, leaning on the fence by the loading chute, watched them go and then turned his eyes to Amelie. He did not smile exactly, but he nodded once. In the truck on the way home, Amelie stared at her hands. "He's right about one thing," she said. "He's not right about me being a life raft. I didn't mean that one. I meant the rest. I don't know what I'm doing, Jake, not really. I'm guessing every day. You don't know how to run all of it today. Tomorrow you learn another piece. That's how anybody does it. You make it sound simple. It isn't simple. It's just possible." She looked at him, then full in the face. He kept his eyes on the road because the look on her face was doing something to him that he had not given his permission for yet. It was the next week when Maya got sick. It came on fast, the way kid fevers do. By bedtime, her cheeks were red, and by midnight she was burning hot against Jake's wrist. The fever came back in the afternoon, and Jake had 3 deliveries at his own ranch that could not be missed, and a vet visit at the Walker place that could not be moved. He stood in Maya's doorway, holding his hat in both hands, and feeling the kind of helplessness he had not felt since the worst weeks with Sarah. "Go," Amelie said behind him. "I've got her." He turned. "Jake, go. I'll call you the second anything changes. I've got her." He looked at her standing in the hallway in jeans and one of his old sweatshirts with the sleeves pushed up, and he heard himself say very quietly, "All right." He came back at dusk. The house was warm and quiet. Upstairs, Amelie was sitting in the chair beside Maya's bed, with her head tipped against the wall and her eyes closed. Maya was asleep on her side, one small hand curled around 2 of Amelie's fingers. The dragon book lay open on the bedspread. The stuffed rabbit was tucked in beside her under the quilt. Amelie opened her eyes. She did not move her hand. "Her fever broke an hour ago," she whispered. Jake nodded. He could not get the word "thank you" out of his throat in any shape that would sound like enough. Later, when he came back upstairs with a glass of water, Maya was awake. She looked at Amelie and then at the book, and then at Amelie again. "My mommy had long hair like you," Maya said, very quiet. "She used to sing me a song about a moon. I forgot how it goes." Amelie's eyes filled. She did not let it spill. "That's all right, honey. The song remembers itself. You'll hear it again." Maya closed her eyes. Emily sat very still until Maya's breathing went even. Then she got up, walked past Jake without looking at him, and went down the hall to the spare room and shut the door. Jake stood in the hallway for a long time. 2 nights after that, somebody left the gate to the lower road pasture open. Jake did not know for sure that it was Grant. He had his guess, but suspicion did not put cattle back behind a fence, and Ray's call came in just as Jake was pulling a pot off the stove. "Cattle on Miller Road. 6 head, maybe more. Rain coming back hard?" Emily was already grabbing her coat. For the next 2 hours, the 3 of them and a neighbor named Pete worked along the ditch in the cold drizzle, moving the cattle 1 slow yard at a time back through the broken gate. Emily slipped twice in the mud and got up twice. Once a steer turned and made a hard step toward her, and Jake's heart did something unfair against his ribs, but she held her ground long enough for him to swing around and push the animal off her line. When the last cow was through and Ray got the temporary chain, Emily bent forward with both hands on her knees, mud to her wrists. Ray walked over and put 1 big hand on her shoulder for half a second. "You did good tonight, Emily." She straightened like those 4 words were heavier than any of Grant's speeches. Back at the house, Jake left clean towels by the bathroom and put coffee on, even though it was too late for it. Emily came down the hall a while later in one of his old flannels because her clothes were past saving. The flannel hung off her wrists. "I look ridiculous," she said. "You look like you worked." She sat at the table. He sat across from her. The rain had started up again soft now against the window over the sink. "Tell me about her," Emily said. Jake did not have to ask who. He talked about Sarah for the first time in 3 years, about the way she had laughed at his bad jokes for the first 6 months they were dating just to be polite, and then started telling him to stop when she felt safe enough to mean it. About the diagnosis and the long winter that followed. About the way he had told himself after she was gone that he was done with this particular kind of love because the bill was too high. Emily listened with her hands wrapped around the warm mug. She did not fill any of his silences. When he was finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were not cold anymore. "My father used to say, a person doesn't get to choose when home shows up," she said. "Only whether they answer the door when it knocks." Jake felt the corner of his mouth move without his permission. "That sounds like David." That was David. They sat like that a while, her hand in his, the rain working softly against the glass. Neither of them said anything they could not take back. But when she got up to go down the hall to her room, she did not let go of his hand right away, and he did not let go of hers. There was a small, ordinary second in the kitchen doorway when she leaned her forehead against his shoulder and he rested his cheek against the top of her hair, and they stood that way long enough for the kitchen clock to tick twice. Then she stepped back and went to her room. The next morning, the paper came. It was a small paper, the kind every county still printed, and the article was on page 3, under a headline that did not say anything outright, but said everything to anybody who knew how to read it. There was a picture of Jake and Emily coming out of the courthouse. The reporter quoted concerned family members who suggested the marriage had been arranged in haste to circumvent David Walker's wishes, and who hinted in language that sounded clean on the page, if you did not have to live underneath it, that a vulnerable young woman might have been talked into an arrangement she did not understand by a neighbor with financial difficulties of his own. Grant was not named. He did not need to be. Jake read it twice in the kitchen with his hands flat on the table. Then he folded the paper closed and put it in the trash under the coffee grounds. Emily came in 2 minutes later in her work clothes and saw his face. "What?" "Nothing right now." "Jake." "Later. Get some breakfast. We have to be at the Walker place by 8. She did not push. He loved her a little for that, and he hated that he had let himself notice he loved her at all. It was Maya who pulled the thread loose. She came home from school that afternoon with her backpack dragging behind her and went straight upstairs without saying hello. Jake set down the wrench he had been holding and followed her up. He sat on the edge of her bed. She was on her side with her face to the wall. "What's going on, baby?" "A boy at school said you married Miss Emily for money. He said it because his mama said it. He said you didn't really love her. He said you and Miss Emily were just pretending." Jake closed his eyes. He could feel a heat working up the back of his neck that had nothing to do with the boy. "Maya! Daddy!" She turned over then. Her eyes were wet. "Do you love Miss Amelie? Or are you just pretending?" Of all the questions he had braced for, he had not braced for that one in his daughter's voice in the room where her mother had once read her to sleep. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He sat there on the edge of the bed with his hands on his knees, and the silence stretched a beat too long, and his daughter watched him with the steady attention of a child waiting for a true answer. "I don't know how to answer that yet, sweetheart," he said finally, "but I'm not pretending, I promise you that. I'm not pretending." It was not enough. He saw it in her face. She nodded the brave little nod she had learned at her mother's funeral and rolled over again to face the wall. He did not see Amelie on the stairs. He found her in the spare room an hour later, sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands folded in her lap the way a person sits in a waiting room. The duffel bag was open beside her. Half her clothes were already inside it. "Amelie." "I heard her, Jake." She didn't mean it the way it sounded. She meant it exactly the way it sounded. She's 6 years old and she's already getting that thrown at her in a schoolyard because of me. I won't do that to her. "Amelie, listen." "You listen." Her voice was very quiet, which was worse than if it had been loud. "I came to your door because I needed help. You gave it. I will never be able to pay you back for what you have done for me. But I made you a promise on my first night in this house and you made me say it back. Maya comes first. Always." She zipped the bag. "The farm can be lost. Maya can't." She left the note on the kitchen table on her way out. Jake found it after he had heard her car pull onto the road. He stood in the kitchen with his hand flat on the paper and did not pick it up for a long time because he already knew what it said, and because he understood in the cold, quiet way a man understands a thing, he should have seen coming that he had let it get to this point by not answering a question when the question was asked. Outside, the wind was working at the eaves again the way it had the night Amelie first knocked on his door. The compliance review at Mr. Callahan's office was the next morning. Jake did not sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with the unread note in front of him. Around 2 in the morning, he finally picked it up. It said what he had known it would say, that she was sorry, that she had meant every promise she made at this table, that the deadline could pass without her and the farm could pass with it, and that none of that came before a 6-year-old's heart. She had signed it, Amelie, not Amelie Harper. He folded the paper into a small square and set it inside the breast pocket of the dark blue shirt on the back of the chair. Then he went upstairs and stood in his daughter's doorway and watched her sleep. Sarah had said something to him once in the last good month before the diagnosis went bad lightly while folding a dish towel at this same kitchen sink. He had not understood the weight of it then. He understood it tonight. Don't let fear be the reason you don't love Jake. He had let fear be the reason for 3 years. He moved without thinking after that. He laid out Maya's good dress on the chair by her bed. He laid out his cleanest shirt. He pulled a sheet of construction paper and the box of crayons out of the kitchen drawer, set them on the table, and went back upstairs and slept for 1 hour with his boots still on. At 6 in the morning, he went into Maya's room and sat on the edge of her bed. "Baby, wake up. I need your help with something." She blinked at him. "Where's Miss Amelie?" "She had to go somewhere yesterday. We're going to see her this morning. There's a lawyer who has to decide something about her daddy's farm. I want you with me when we go in there. Will you come?" "Will Miss Amelie be there?" "Yes." Maya thought about it the same careful way she thought about everything. "Are we going to bring her home?" Jake's throat did the thing it had done in the kitchen the morning Amelie had said nobody is going to take her place. "I hope so, baby. That's mostly up to her. But I want to ask." Maya got out of bed and went down to the kitchen with him in her pajamas and climbed into a chair at the table. "Daddy, what do you want me to draw?" "Whatever you want. But you've got time for one good one." She picked up a brown crayon first. She drew the farmhouse, the porch, and the 2 front windows, a tall figure on the porch step with a hat, a smaller figure beside it with long yellow hair, and a smaller figure still between them holding the rabbit. She wrote her name across the top in careful letters, and underneath in slightly less careful letters the words, "and us." Jake looked at the paper for a long time before he could find a steady voice. "That's the best drawing you've ever made," he said. She tucked the rabbit under her arm before they left the house the way another child might tuck in a sibling. The lawyer's office sat above the bank with narrow stairs and old carpet that smelled like dust. Mr. Callahan had known David Walker most of his professional life, and he had the careful, slow way of moving papers around a desk that made men like Grant impatient. Emily was already in the office when Jake and Maya came up the stairs. She was sitting in one of the two client chairs in front of Callahan's desk in a clean white blouse, and her hair pulled back with a folder twice as thick as the one she had carried to Jake's door in the rain. Grant was in the other chair, one ankle on his knee, telling Callahan in the warm voice of a man explaining a hard truth to a friend that his sister had panicked, that she had married a neighbor whose ranch was in trouble, that she had no idea what she had signed up for. Emily was not looking at Grant. She was looking at the door. When the door opened, she did not move. She just looked. Jake came in with his hat in one hand and Maya's small hand in the other. Maya was carrying the drawing the way she had carried the rabbit on the first night, with both arms very carefully. He felt Emily's eyes go from his face to his daughter's face to the paper in his daughter's arms, and he felt her breath leave her body in one short, broken pull. Grant turned his head. The warm voice cooled. "Well," Grant said, "here we go." Jake walked past him without answering and stopped behind Emily's chair. He set his hat on the corner of the desk. He put one hand very lightly on Emily's shoulder. She did not move away. "Mr. Callahan," Jake said, "sorry we're late." "You're not late, Mr. Harper. Have a seat." Jake brought the third chair from the wall. He set it on Emily's other side between her and Grant. Maya climbed into his lap on her own, the rabbit pressed against her chest. Callahan took his glasses off and folded them on top of his notepad. "We're here," he said, "because Mr. Walker has filed a formal challenge to the marriage and to the operational standing of his sister. He has asked the estate to review compliance and consider transferring primary control. Mr. Walker, you've had your turn. Mrs. Harper, the floor is yours." Emily opened the folder. She did not look up the whole time she spoke. That was not weakness. That was her keeping hold of her voice. She laid out paid invoices, vet receipts, fuel logs, equipment repairs, fencing orders. Supplier agreements, she had renegotiated herself her own initials in clean blue ink at the bottom. A daily schedule with the workers' names and their duties for the next 30 days, signed by Ray on behalf of the men. A roof estimate for the south barn with a deposit already paid. Short-dated letters from Marlene at the feed store and from two neighboring ranchers. Every page in order, every page weighed. Grant let out a short laugh. "You got the hired hands to sign a paper. Congratulations." Emily did not look at him. "I'm not finished," she said. "You got the hired, don't interrupt me again." The words were not loud. That was what made them. Grant's mouth closed. Callahan behind the desk did not smile, but the corner of his eye moved. Emily finished. She closed the folder. She folded her hands on top of it. "I'm not telling you I know everything, Mr. Callahan. I'm telling you the farm is running. The bills are being paid. The repairs are scheduled. The cattle are accounted for. The men know who makes the decisions. And the land is not for sale." The room was quiet for a long second. Then Grant turned in his chair toward Jake. "And what about him?" Grant said. "You're not going to ask about him, a man one season from losing his own place, sitting here with my sister's daughter on his lap, like he's some kind of family man. You think he married her out of love? Callahan." Maya's hand went very tight around Jake's thumb. Jake set his hand over hers on his knee. Then he picked Maya up gently and stood her on the floor and reached for the drawing she had brought. He laid the drawing on the corner of the desk where Callahan could see it. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand up taller than he needed to. He just spoke. "My father told me one thing more times than he told me anything else," Jake said. "He said the worth of a man is not in what he owns. It's in what he is willing to stand up for when standing up costs him." He looked at Callahan. "David Walker was one of the few men in this county who treated my wife and me like people the day we moved into that farmhouse across the road. When my daddy was on hospice, David walked across his pasture with a tin of biscuits in his hands and sat with my mama until she could breathe again. He sat on my porch the week Sarah died and didn't say a single useless word. When this town didn't know what to do with my family, David Walker knew exactly what to do. He came over. Grant opened his mouth. Jake kept going quiet. I didn't marry Emily for the farm, Mr. Callahan. I have a farm. It is, as her brother is so eager to mention, not a rich one. I married Emily because I owed David Walker a debt no piece of land could ever pay. And because for the first time in 3 years, my daughter came down the stairs in the morning and laughed because a woman she barely knew was sitting at our kitchen table. He turned finally and looked at Grant. You want to call that fraud, Jake said. You go on and call it. Take it to whatever court will hear you. But you will not one more time, not ever again, say in front of my daughter that what I feel for my wife is fake. Are we clear on that, Grant? Grant did not answer. Callahan picked the drawing up, looked at it for a long moment, and set it back down. I have known David Walker the better part of my professional life, he said. I do not believe he would have written that condition in his will if he did not trust the neighbor he named in the letter that accompanied it. The marriage license satisfies the stated condition. The operational records satisfy the implied one. The estate will proceed with Emily Harper retaining primary control of the Walker property, effective immediately. The challenge is dismissed. Emily closed her eyes, just once. Grant stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. You'll regret this, he said. Both of you. Emily looked up at him. Maybe, she said quietly. But it'll be my regret, Grant, not yours. He grabbed his coat off the back of the chair and left. The door swung shut behind him, hard enough that the glass rattled in the frame, and then the office was quiet, and Mr. Callahan was sliding the drawing back across the desk to Maya with the gravity of a man returning evidence. Young lady, he said, that is a very fine drawing. Thank you, Maya said. Outside, the air had that washed, hesitant feel of a day deciding whether to clear. Jake walked Emily and Maya down the narrow stairs and out onto the sidewalk. The town was moving around them like nothing in particular had happened. Emily stood at the passenger door of Jake's truck and did not get in. Why did you come? She said. The farm was about to be lost. You didn't have to come. Jake set Maya gently down on the running board so she was just about eye level with the two of them. He took off his hat. I came because she asked me a question yesterday afternoon, Jake said, that I didn't answer. And then I went to bed last night and I sat in the kitchen with your note and I figured out why I didn't answer it. Emily's eyes were already wet. She didn't try to stop them this time. Sarah told me something once, Jake said. Toward the end, she said don't let fear be the reason you don't love. I have been letting fear be the reason for 3 years. I told myself it was because of Maya. Some of it was. Most of it was just me. He took a breath. You came to my door because you needed a husband by Friday. I said yes because I owed your father and because my daughter handed you her rabbit. I did not know that night that I had needed you for a long time before you ever knocked. I figured that out somewhere around the middle of the week. I figured out the rest of it last night. He looked down at Maya. I have to ask you something, baby. Honest answer. Do you want Miss Emily to come home with us? Maya looked at Emily for a long, serious second. Yes. Emily's face broke quietly. She knelt down on the sidewalk in her clean white blouse right there in front of the bank, and Maya stepped off the running board into her and wrapped both small arms around her neck. Emily held her without saying anything because there was nothing to say yet. I'm sorry I scared you yesterday, Emily said into Maya's hair. It's okay. Daddy told me you weren't pretending. He just didn't know how to say it yet. Emily laughed, half a laugh, half something else, and pressed her forehead to Maya's. Jake stood there with his hat in his hand and watched the two of them and a thing he had been carrying in his chest for 3 years set itself down beside him and stayed there quiet, the way a tired dog finally lies down at a man's feet. They drove home with Maya in the middle, on her booster the drawing on her lap, the stuffed rabbit on top of the drawing. The sun broke through somewhere west of the river and laid itself across the wet fields in long bars of gold. They passed the fence line where the Harper place met the Walker place, the one that had outlasted both their fathers and a lot of weather besides. Maya was asleep by the time they pulled up to the cattle gate. Jake stopped the truck in the middle of the drive. Amelie was looking out the windshield at the porch of his farmhouse, the one with the chair where her father had once sat in silence the week Sarah died. Her hand was resting on top of Maya's. "I thought I was helping you save your home," Jake said very quietly so as not to wake his daughter. "It took me until last night to understand I was finding mine again. I should have said it the first time she asked. I'm saying it now." Amelie reached across Maya's sleeping head and rested her hand on the side of his face. "Say it again," she whispered, "just so I have it. I love you, Amelie. I love my wife. That's the true answer to the question my daughter asked." She closed her eyes. A tear ran down the side of her nose and into the corner of her mouth, and she did not bother wiping it. She leaned across the booster, careful of Maya, and kissed him once on the cheek, the way a person kisses a thing they intend to keep. Jake put the truck in gear and rolled the rest of the way up the drive. He carried Maya into the house and laid her down on the couch under the throw blanket his mother had crocheted a long time ago. Amelie stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at it all, the table where she had cried over coffee on her first night, the window over the sink where she had watched the rain. "This is a good house," she said the way she had said it the first afternoon. "It's a better one with you in it." She came across the kitchen and put her arms around his middle and laid her ear against his chest. He folded her in. For the first time in 3 years, when Jake looked out across his land, he did not feel alone. And for the first time in her life, when Amelie looked out at the place where she had grown up, she felt all the way through that she belonged. The wind, when it came up again that evening, knocked once at the eaves and then passed on by. You know, the funny thing about doors is that most of us spend our lives deciding which ones to keep closed. We close the door on a person we lost. We close the door on the version of ourselves who used to believe in things. We close the door on second chances because the first one cost us so much, and then one night in the rain somebody we barely know stands on the other side and asks us to open it anyway. Jake and Amelie's story isn't really about a farm or a deadline. It's about two people who had every reason to stay closed up and chose not to. About a small girl who handed over a stuffed rabbit because she could see faster than the grown-ups that the lady at the kitchen table needed it more. About a father who had to be reminded by his own daughter that pretending not to feel something is not the same as not feeling it. I'd love to hear from you on this one. If you're still here at the end of this story, drop a comment and tell me. Has there ever been a knock at your door, real or otherwise, that turned out to be the start of something you didn't know you were waiting for? Who was the David Walker in your life, the quiet neighbor who showed up when nobody else knew how to? Your stories are the reason these stories get written, so please share them. And if you'd like more like this, the slow, honest ones about ordinary people finding their way back to each other, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. A like or a share helps these stories reach somebody who might need to hear them tonight. Thank you for sitting with Jake and Amelie all the way through. Take care of each other out there. And whatever you do this week, don't let fear be the reason you don't love.